The cold, sterile air of the detention chamber burned Jack Reaper Calloway's lungs as he regained consciousness. His arms were shackled behind his back, wrists raw from the unyielding metallic restraints. The last thing he remembered was a violent ambush. His squad eliminated, their ship torn from the void, and then darkness. Now he was seated in a stark, dimly lit room with walls of pulsing, organic metal, as if the place itself were alive. Before him stood a towering figure draped in ceremonial armor, its elongated skull adorned with delicate golden filaments that flickered like static electricity. A Zikari. Not just any, though. This one exuded the cold authority of command. Behind him, two more stood motionless, their chitinous exoskeletons clicking faintly as they shifted their weight. Primate, the commander's voice rasped, heavily accented, yet perfectly intelligible. You are now property of the Galactic Council. You will answer our questions. Jack exhaled, letting his muscles relax despite the obvious tension in the room. He scanned his surroundings, mapping exits, distances, weapons, everything SEAL training had drilled into him. His captors were disciplined but confident, their stance casual, weapons holstered. They didn't see him as a threat. That was their first mistake. The Zikari commander paced slowly. We intercepted your primitive vessel near restricted space. It is curious that your species has advanced to this level of technology without our awareness. He turned, his lipless mouth twisting in something akin to amusement. Your people are nothing, a footnote in the grand history of the galaxy. And yet, you fight as if you are worth more. Jack held his silence, staring at the commander with an unsettling calm. It unnerved the creature, just a little. The Zikari continued. Your designation has been retrieved from the wreckage. Jack Calloway, a warrior class, your insignia suggests. What is the meaning of the moniker Reaper? Jack let a slow smirk curl his lips. You'll find out soon enough. A sharp hiss filled the chamber as the Zikari's second-in-command stepped forward, a thinner but more menacing figure with needle-like digits. This one was different, no insignia, no armor. A scientist, perhaps. Or worse. You misunderstand your situation, the new figure whispered, voice like dry leaves rustling. This is not an interrogation where you will withhold information and later escape. We have perfected the art of extracting what we need. Your mind will break before your body does. Jack tilted his head slightly. Yeah, good luck with that. A humming vibration filled the room as the alien extended a spindly hand toward him. Jack's vision blurred, his skull feeling as if it were caught in a vice. The sensation clawed deeper, scraping against thoughts, memories, instincts, but it wasn't enough. Years of training had conditioned him against psychological and physical torture. He leaned into the pain, let it pass through him. The pressure grew sharper, a needle pressing at the edges of his mind, searching for weakness. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sensation snapped away. The scientist staggered back, mandibles clicking in alarm. Impossible, it muttered. Primitive, yet resistant. Jack chuckled, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, we humans have a nasty habit of not dying easy. The commander's amusement faded. He gestured, and the guard seized Jack's arms, hauling him up. Put him in the deep cells, he ordered. Let him sit in darkness. We will see how long his bravado lasts when the void speaks back. The journey through the bowels of the Zikari facility was a lesson in restraint. Jack took in every detail, the placement of sentries, the dull hum of security fields, the strange, fluid-like material that lined the corridors. The structure was alien yet methodical, built with efficiency, not flexibility. That meant predictable patterns. Patterns could be exploited. The guard shoved him into a narrow pod-like chamber. The walls constricted around him, sealing him into absolute blackness. Then silence. No sound, no light, nothing but the suffocating weight of emptiness. Sensory deprivation, a cruel but effective method of breaking prisoners. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heartbeat, focusing inward. He had spent weeks underwater in blacked-out conditions, trained to resist sleep deprivation, starvation, isolation. This was nothing new. The aliens thought they understood him, thought he was just another brute from an uncivilized world. That was their second mistake. Time passed without measure. Hours, maybe days. Jack used the confinement to replay everything he had learned. The layout, the weaknesses in their armor, the number of guards in each sector. Patterns. Every structure had them, and every structure could be broken. Then the door hissed open. Light poured in, stabbing at his retinas. But he kept his reaction minimal. The guards yanked him out, dragging him down another corridor. This one larger, grander. A new destination. As they entered a vast chamber, Jack's instinct sharpened. A prison, filled with towering, battle-worn figures. Warriors from a dozen different species, each confined within separate fields of pulsating energy. The air crackled with restrained violence, with the weight of defeat. A massive reptilian alien sneered at him from behind a force field, its voice a deep, guttural growl. Another primitive tossed into the pit. This one looks weaker than the last. Jack smirked. Guess you'll find out. The guard shoved him forward, depositing him inside an empty cell. Energy bars flickered to life behind him. He rolled his shoulders, shaking out the stiffness, then took stock of his surroundings. He wasn't alone. A group of prisoners observed him from the neighboring cells, some with curiosity, others with indifference. The largest among them, a brute with war-scarred flesh and eyes like embers, stepped closer. "You are new here, human," he rumbled, "but you will learn quickly. There is no escape." Jack met his gaze without flinching. "That's so." The brute nodded solemnly. "The Zikari do not make mistakes. They crush those who resist. You are already dead." Jack exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the situation settle. He had no weapons, no allies, no clear route to freedom. And yet he smiled. "Yeah," he murmured. "They said that about us before. Never really worked out for him." The brute frowned but said nothing. Around them, the other prisoners watched with quiet interest. Jack leaned back against the cold metal wall, mind already working. The aliens thought they had captured a human soldier. What they didn't realize was that they had trapped something far worse. They had locked themselves in with him. And that was their third mistake. The days inside the prison passed without measure, but Jack Calloway had long since stopped caring. Time wasn't his concern, information was. Every shift change, every patrol route, every moment of weakness displayed by the guards was cataloged and stored. He moved with purpose, observing, listening, filing away details that others ignored. The prisoners kept their distance at first. Some watched him with quiet skepticism, others with outright hostility. No one spoke unless necessary. It wasn't fear, not exactly, it was resignation. They had been here too long. Their defiance ground down into cold acceptance. That made them unreliable. Broken men didn't make for good allies. Jack had to change that. He started small, never drawing attention to himself. He tested the prison's routines, waiting for mistakes. A dropped ration tray near a security panel, a slight delay in the force field cycling pattern. The Zikari were efficient but predictable. That predictability would be their undoing. One night, as the dim lighting pulsed into its artificial sleep cycle, Jack caught a figure moving beyond the energy barriers. A lean, wiry alien with sharp, mechanical limbs, one of the technicians. Unlike the guards, this one didn't carry a weapon. He moved with purpose but hesitated near Jack's cell, his golden eyes flicking toward him before quickly shifting away. Jack waited until the technician made another pass the next evening. This time, he spoke. "You're not like the others." The technician stiffened but didn't stop. Jack watched him work, methodically adjusting a nearby control panel. "You're not a soldier. You think." Jack leaned against the wall, studying him. "What's your name?" The technician hesitated. His mandibles clicked before he responded, voice low. "Vellner." Jack nodded. "You're an engineer." "A scientist." Vellner kept his focus on the panel. "I oversee structural integrity, system diagnostics." Jack smirked. "So you keep this place running?" Vellner didn't confirm it, but the way his shoulders tensed told Jack everything he needed. Jack let a moment of silence stretch between them before speaking again, quieter this time. "You don't belong here, Vellner. I can see it." Vellner hesitated again, then turned slightly. His gaze flicked over Jack, scanning him as if searching for something. Finally, he said, "The Zikari do not make mistakes. You will not escape." Jack's smirk deepened. "You're right. I won't. Not alone." The moment passed, and Vellner left without another word. But Jack had planted the seed. Now he just had to wait for it to take root. A week later, the guards made a mistake. 2 Zikari enforcers escorted a new prisoner, a broad-shouldered, battle-scarred veteran from a species Jack hadn't encountered before. The moment they deactivated the force field to shove him inside his cell, the newcomer turned, fast as lightning, and slammed a thick, calloused fist into one guard's throat. The second guard reacted instantly, bringing a shock baton up, only to be intercepted by Jack. Jack moved without hesitation, stepping through his own cell's open field before it reactivated. The baton wielder swung, but Jack ducked low, driving an elbow into the alien's ribs. The impact staggered it, but not enough. The Zikari were built for durability. It lunged forward, mandible snapping. Jack twisted, using the guard's momentum against it, hooking his leg behind its knee and slamming it down. Before the guard could recover, Jack's hands were already on its sidearm. He twisted the weapon free, pivoted, and fired. The stun bolt struck the first guard mid-struggle, dropping it instantly. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. Silence filled the block. Jack exhaled slowly, lowering the weapon. He turned toward the other prisoners, now standing at the edges of their cells, watching. One of them, a towering, horned brute with deep scars lining his chest, stepped forward. His voice was gravel, rough and low. "You just signed your death warrant, human." Jack smirked. "Maybe, but I'd rather go down swinging." The brute studied him for a long moment before a slow, grudging nod. Jack didn't need words to understand it. Respect had been earned. Before reinforcements could arrive, Jack tossed the captured weapon into the ventilation shaft behind his cell, ensuring the Zikari wouldn't reclaim it. Then, he stepped back into his cell as if nothing had happened. When the guards stormed in minutes later, they found 2 unconscious officers and no sign of resistance. Jack let them beat him for it. He needed them to think he was reckless, impulsive, just another soldier lashing out in desperation. He needed them to underestimate him. Later that night, when the pain had dulled to an ache, Vellner returned. He stood just beyond the barrier, expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he placed a small data crystal against the console. Jack recognized the act for what it was. An offering. Jack's smile was grim. The first piece had just moved into place. The storm broke 2 nights later. Jack knelt in the darkness of his cell, listening to the rhythm of the facility. Every hum of the force fields, every rotation of the guards, every flicker of power surges running through the walls, patterns, all of them. The Zikari relied on control, on the belief that their security was absolute. They had never fought a man like him. Vellner had done his part. The stolen data crystal had contained schematics of the prison's energy grid, emergency lockdown procedures, and, most importantly, the ventilation shafts that bypassed critical security nodes. It wasn't a flawless plan, but Jack had never believed in flawless plans. He believed in adapting. A distant tremor rippled through the walls, subtle, but distinct. Right on schedule. Vellner had disabled the stabilizers in the eastern wing, forcing the system into diagnostic mode. That meant power fluctuations, camera loops, and, for the next 6 minutes, open vulnerabilities. Jack shifted his stance, muscles coiling in anticipation. Then the lights flickered. The moment the power cycled, Jack exploded into motion. He launched himself at the force field, already weakened from the energy redirection, and slammed his boot against the central emitter node. Sparks erupted as the barrier destabilized for a fraction of a second, long enough. He rolled through the flickering gap, just as the system rebooted. Alarms blared, but Jack didn't stop. 3 guards rounded the corner, rifles raised. He was already inside their range, too close for them to react in time. The first went down with a sharp elbow to the throat, the second with a redirected shot that burned a smoldering hole through its torso. The third had just enough time to flinch before Jack yanked the rifle from its grip and drove the butt of the weapon into its skull. Shouts echoed from deeper in the cell block. The prisoners had seen everything. Jack turned, eyes locking onto the brute with the horned scars. "You want out?" he barked. "Then move." The brute hesitated for only a second before slamming his fists into the control panel, shattering the emergency release. The force fields flickered and collapsed. Chaos erupted. The prisoners surged forward, some attacking guards, others making for the exits. Jack didn't bother with them. His focus was already on the next objective. He sprinted down the corridor, rifle at the ready, pulse steady. Vellner had warned him that the armory was 6 levels up, past an access corridor guarded by heavy turrets. A death trap for anyone dumb enough to charge in blind. Fortunately, Jack didn't do blind. Another explosion rocked the facility. The security network was failing faster than expected. Vellner must have pushed harder than planned. That meant less time to improvise. Jack took a sharp turn and nearly ran into a Zikari enforcer. It was larger than the others, armored in reinforced plating, and carried a plasma glaive that crackled with violent energy. The Zikari sneered. "Surrender, primate." Jack fired. The plasma bolts slammed into the enforcer's chest, dissipating harmlessly against its shield. The creature lunged, glaive slicing through the air. Jack ducked low, feeling the heat graze past his scalp, and drove his rifle stock into the thing's knee. It staggered but didn't fall. Too strong. Too big. Jack adapted. He shifted, twisting with the momentum, and grabbed the Zikari's own weapon arm. He yanked hard, throwing the creature off balance, then jammed the rifle's overheated barrel against its exposed throat. It snarled, struggling. Jack pulled the trigger. The point-blank blast took half its head off. Jack exhaled and kept moving. By the time he reached the access corridor, the battle had spread. The facility trembled with bursts of violence, distant shouts, and the smell of burning metal. The armory doors loomed ahead, locked tight. No time for subtlety. Jack pressed his stolen rifle against the control panel and fired. Sparks showered, the panel exploded, and the doors groaned open just enough for him to slip through. Inside, racks of weapons gleamed under flickering emergency lights. Jack grabbed a combat harness, holstered a pair of energy pistols, and slung a heavy plasma rifle over his back. He felt whole again. A sharp clang echoed behind him. He spun, rifle raised. Vellner stood there, eyes wide, breathing hard. "They're sending in reinforcements," he panted. "You have minutes, maybe less." Jack nodded. "Then we don't waste them." Vellner hesitated, mandibles twitching. "You understand what you've done. The Zikari do not forgive rebellion." Jack's grin was all teeth. "Good." Vellner stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "Follow me." Jack fell in beside him, pulse steady. The night wasn't over yet. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, his boots silent against the metallic floor. The armory's cold blue lights cast flickering shadows over racks of alien weaponry. But there was no time to admire the arsenal. Vellner led the way, his movements sharp and urgent, mandibles clicking in agitation. The Zikari were regrouping. The longer they stayed, the harder escape would become. The plan had changed. Jack could feel it. There was no clean exit anymore. Only survival through superior violence. The corridor ahead branched into two paths. Vellner stopped short, his golden eyes darting between them. Left passage leads to auxiliary docking bays. If we reach a shuttle, we... The right passage exploded. A shockwave blasted through the hallway, tearing into the walls. Jack hit the ground as searing heat washed over him. He rolled into cover, shielding his face as metal fragments rained down. Through the smoke, figures emerged, Zakari enforcers, fully armored, weapons raised. A voice carried over the chaos, cold and measured. Enough! Jack recognized it instantly. The Zakari commander from the interrogation chamber stepped through the wreckage, pristine despite the destruction. His black ceremonial armor gleamed under the emergency lights, a plasma sword humming at his side. The guards flanked him with perfect discipline, weapons trained. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. The commander's gaze locked onto him with something beyond anger, something calculative. You believe this is victory. His voice was steady, almost amused. You are a single creature against the weight of an empire. There is nowhere left to run. Jack exhaled. He felt the familiar edge of battle settle into his bones, the clarity that came when death loomed close. The Zakari didn't understand what they were up against. He smiled. You think I'm running? Then he moved. Jack fired mid-step, a controlled burst that struck one of the enforcers dead center. The impact sent the alien staggering, but he was already shifting his aim, already anticipating their counterstrike. The air filled with plasma fire. Vellner dove aside, his smaller frame slipping into the shadows. Jack dropped to a knee, sending another guard sprawling with a well-placed shot to the knee joint. The commander lunged, plasma sword slicing through the air. But Jack was faster. He twisted, narrowly avoiding the searing blade, then drove the stock of his rifle into the commander's ribs. The impact sent the Zakari back a step, but only a step. The commander recovered with terrifying speed, bringing his sword in a tight arc. A bolt of searing plasma struck him from behind. Vellner, the scientist, stood at the far end of the hall, his hands trembling over a stolen sidearm. The shot had barely slowed the commander, but it had given Jack an opening. Jack didn't hesitate. He surged forward, shoulder-checking the wounded commander into the wall. Before the alien could recover, Jack ripped the plasma sword from his grasp and drove it straight through his chest. The commander's breath hitched. His mandibles twitched in disbelief as the energy blade burned through him. Jack held his gaze, watching as the light dimmed. Then he wrenched the sword free. The last two enforcers hesitated, just long enough for Jack to end them both. A single shot to the head for one, a quick slash across the throat for the other. Then silence. Vellner stepped forward cautiously, staring at the fallen commander. His voice was quiet. You killed him." Jack exhaled, flicking the blood off the blade. "Yeah." He turned toward the docking bay corridor. "Time to go." They ran. The facility trembled around them, alarms screaming. The rebellion was in full collapse, battles raging across every sector. But Jack had his eyes on the prize. A shuttle. Their ticket out. They reached the hangar, only to find it swarming with reinforcements. Zakari gunships loomed overhead, soldiers flooding the platforms. Too many. Even Jack couldn't shoot his way through this. Vellner's breath came fast. "We won't make it." Jack scanned the bay, mind racing. Then he saw it, an active fuel line running beneath the deck. His smirk was grim. "We will." He took careful aim and fired. The explosion ripped through the hangar, sending debris flying. The shockwave knocked the Zakari back, throwing their lines into disarray. Jack grabbed Vellner by the arm and sprinted through the chaos. The nearest shuttle loomed ahead, its ramp still open. Jack didn't slow. He vaulted inside, Vellner stumbling behind him. The cockpit was sleek, controls unfamiliar but intuitive. Jack didn't need perfection. He needed speed. Engines roared to life. The shuttle lifted, jerking beneath him as the bay doors struggled to seal. Fighters scrambled, trying to lock onto them. Jack bared his teeth. Not today. He punched the throttle. The ship blasted through the bay doors, streaking into the void. Alarms flared across the Zakari fleet, but Jack was already weaving through them, pushing the shuttle to its limits. Vellner gripped the seat beside him, voice tight. "They'll hunt us." Jack's grin didn't fade. Let him try. Stars stretched before them, endless and open. Jack Calloway had done the impossible. Again. And he wasn't done yet.